alive! It's alive! Oh, in the name of God! Now I know what it feels like to be God!
I didn't think that there would be a winner in this poll thing that I'm doing. I just thought it would be fun to do it, gain a little bit more, maybe gain a little bit more eyes to the reviews, have it be a little bit more interactive. But man, it took me a Twitter poll, it took me an Instagram poll, and 3 Facebook polls. And at the time, I was like, hey, go with Frankenstein last night. It was literally still tied. It was just unbelievable. Like these movies are just like so close. Like I think in people's minds, I mean, they were a few years apart, but because they were so long ago, I think when people go back and watch them, they maybe just watch both or just interchange what happened in one and the other.
Well, I can tell you, I've actually seen Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein prior to today. I watched the other two back to back earlier this year twice. So, so yeah, I get it. They're intertwined.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is like I haven't watched these films in years, and a lot of what I thought was in Frankenstein wasn't. It was actually in Bride. I'm looking at these things, I'm like, oh, where's the part when that happens? Oh, it's not going to happen. It's going to happen in the follow-up sequel.
Right, right. Yep. No, they're definitely intertwined for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So when did you first see this?
I rented this from a video store probably back in 1985 or 86. And at that time, the big thing was there's that scene with a little girl where she gets tossed in the water. Apparently that scene had been missing for years, or that wasn't shown on the television broadcast and such. So it was like, hey, we're watching Frankenstein uncut. You get to see the whole thing now. I guess that scene was too controversial for many years. So that's when I first saw it, around that time frame. And the scene was there. It was intact.
Yeah, it's probably the best sequence in the film. And when people think of like the monster being this tortured soul or misunderstood creature from the first movie, I think that's it. I don't think anything else really truly represents like this guy is an outsider. This guy was abandoned by his father. This guy just wants to be loved. And these are things when people talk about the movie and talk about Carlos' performance, they mention these type of things. But at least in this movie, that's really it. Otherwise than that, he just legitimately comes off as a monster.
I think it's by far the most memorable scene, and I don't know. I guess audiences couldn't handle that for several decades. But yeah, no, it was a cool scene.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This movie, not as good as I remembered it. Partly, I think, because a lot of the stuff I thought was in it was in Bride. It's still great, but it's a little static. Not its fault, because this was 31, and I think talking movies kind of started it really in earnest in 27 with The Jazz Singer into the late 20s. Yeah. And when they made that shift from silent movies to talkies or talking movies, the way things were set up, a lot of the early talkie films in the early to mid 30s, they had to be very static because of the way they recorded the audio. So there wasn't as much of the camera movements and things like that that were developed prior to that. And a lot of the talkie scenes are just them just sitting in a room, very basic setup, and those scenes don't really come off as well.
Yeah, from what I read, I'm agreeing with you there that there was a lot of things where it would pick up, the crumpling of paper or something like that. They didn't have the same technologies that we do now. Obviously, it was in its very early stages at the time. So yeah, I get it.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I think what hurts a lot of those talking scenes is this movie is extremely melodramatic. It's an economical film. It's a little over an hour, but we go from the mad scientists to the loving husband in like 20 minutes, it seems like. His character just takes this drastic change. And when Frankenstein makes that change, his character just becomes like, I don't know, it's almost, he's very sedated almost. He's lobotomized, I want to say, because he goes from this wiry, energetic, it's alive type character to just like this boring, like.
Heaven wasn't so far away all the time, you know.
I know, but I didn't realize it. My work, those horrible days and nights. I couldn't think of anything else.
Henry, you're not to think of those things anymore. You promised.
All right.
Like I said, I don't know any other way to say it, but like lobotomized, like version of himself, who's just like, you know, in a lot of these boring, like melodramatic talking scenes. And I think for like the formula for movies in that golden era of Hollywood from like 30 to 50 was to have your A and your B story where you had to have the romantic subplots. And these romantic subplots necessarily weren't handled the best in a lot of these movies. And I don't know, I didn't like the performance of the lead actress. She was very over the top.
Something is going to happen. I feel it. I can't get it out of my mind.
You're just nervous.
No, it isn't that. I felt it all day. Something is coming between us. I know it. I know it.
I mean, like I said, it's only an hour, so it's not like these scenes like really took the movie down, but I didn't think they added anything to the movie as well.
Yeah, I won't disagree with you at all. It was, I just, like I said, until this year, it'd been probably 20 years since I'd seen this the last time, and I was kind of struck by that same thing as like, because I seem to remember, you know, the quote unquote mad scientist throughout, but like you said, he's only there for the first, 25 minutes, 30 minutes or so, and then he's kind of out of it at that point, and it's like, I thought it was really a really strange transition because yes, he's back at home, and it's like the whole mad scientist thing has been thrown out the window, and he's just a normal guy at this point, not even talking about it. It's just, and meanwhile, this monster is ravaging the countryside.
I know, you wouldn't even think that this guy created life. You know, it's like after he like creates this monster, this incredible experiment, this like, I mean, you put yourself in their shoes, it's like he became like a god. He even said that in his dialogue. You wouldn't even think that in the very next scene once he's with his wife and, you know, in his father's mansion or wherever that is.
It was completely forgotten, like, which is a little odd because obviously this was his life's work, his life's dream. He probably spent, 10, 15 years working on this, and suddenly he pulls it off and it's like, okay, now I guess I'll get married, move on to the next thing. No big deal.
I know, and I think there was even a scene where his wife had to remind him about it. And he was like, oh, it's no bother. You know, the other guy will take care of him. He'll be here soon. He's always late to weddings.
Henry, I'm afraid. Terribly afraid. Where's Dr. Waldman? Why is he late for the wedding?
Oh, he's always late. He'll be here soon.
You're so nonchalant about your creation, your monster. Like, it's
right,
just,
exactly. Nonchalance. That's the perfect word. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I did think there was a lot to like about the movie, though. I think the look of it was really good. The set design, the makeup, it looked very gothic. You can tell they took a lot of inspiration from the German expressionism that was going on at that time. It didn't look realistic, but it did look amazing, like the look of the sets and everything. It almost reminded you of like a Fritz Lang type movie, or in modern era, like Tim Burton at his best type look to it. I think that was the best aspect.
I think just a little trivia thing, I want to say that when Young Frankenstein came out in the early 70s, I think they used some of the existing sets from the original Frankenstein movie. They were still in existence and still there.
That's interesting. Why not? I mean, it's like I said, Tim Burton still goes for that look today. Forget the 70s. Yeah. It's like in 2020, we have movies that try to look like that. Like I said, it didn't look realistic, but I think it heightened the mood and the tone and really added to the movie. Another thing that I found jarring, I don't know if you noticed it, but the editing was very choppy. You would have someone like smiling, in the next cut, they'd have like a serious face. There were a few jump cuts where it's like someone is in one spot, the very next cut, they jump ahead. there, I don't know if it was boom mics or what it was, but there was like shadows of things coming up and down from the top of the frame at times. I was surprised, like a movie this iconic was, that sloppily cut together. A little distracting. Nothing like too crazy, but nothing you would expect from a movie that's considered one of the greatest ever made.
Yeah, I honestly didn't notice that, to be to be perfectly honest, but yeah, I missed it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good thing then. Maybe it's only for like my eye. Maybe most people probably missed it. So this came out right after Dracula in 31 and kind of kicked off the Universal monster golden age in the 30s. Of the Universal films, like where would you put this as far as like where would you rate it? And what would be your favorite if not this?
Well, it's got to be right up there. I really do like Dracula too, because there's something about the atmosphere of that particular film, and plus it was the quote unquote first of the Universal monster movies,
By a
and it
couple
really
months,
kicked off.
not by a lot. By a
Yeah,
couple months, yeah.
yeah, and it's got that reputation, and it was the golden age of horror, or put it that way. I like the Wolfman too, which I've seen recently, and then of course there's the Mummy and the Invisible Man. Um, but I think this has to be up there in the top three of those. Of
Mhm.
course, Bride of is also very good too. From this, if you look at all the sequels from all those Universal movies, Bride of is probably the best sequel, I think.
Yeah, I definitely love Bride of. It might be my favorite in the series. I also think Son of was very underrated as well. It had the guy with the metal arm that's been
Hmm.
replicated a lot in other movies and stuff like that. I think this might be my favorite horror movie franchise. I have watched probably Friday the 13th franchise more than any. But as far as like the series that consists of the greatest movies, I definitely say Frankenstein is way up there. What did you think of James Whale as a director? He also directed obviously the sequel, Bride. He also Invisible Man and The Old Dark House. Might be one of the best horror film directors ever.
Yeah, yeah. He just is. Yeah, I've seen all those films. I have all those films. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to tell you. Yeah, he was really good. When you think of that era and these movies, you think of him.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And the movie starts off with a disclaimer.
It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
The guy coming on screen
Hmm.
saying, "Hey," supposedly, if you read about that, they did that because people were fainting and all that stuff, and having like heart attacks, and with horror movies, it's hard to know what to believe because different eras have different disclaimers
Right.
and things like that. And having seen the disclaimer for Paranormal Activity and not liking that movie at all, not buying into that marketing, I'm not sure if like this was marketing. But this was probably the first of horror movie to do what is a popular trope in horror movies. It's like warn you, hey, don't watch this movie because they know that's going to make people want to watch the movie even more. You know?
Right. I think I agree with you that it is people from a different era. Nowadays it's hard to believe anybody could faint while watching Frankenstein. But I knew this woman once who was, she was probably born 1920. She's deceased now, but um, she mentioned once that when she saw, I think it was Phantom of the Opera in the theater when she was a little girl, she threw up, you know, from like the big reveal in that movie that happened. So again, less sophisticated audiences, first time seeing stuff like this, it's conceivable to me. I can't
Maybe.
see it nowadays, but maybe back then, who knows?
Yeah, I choose to be a cynic because I think in a movie we reviewed earlier, Last House on the Left, we talked about the fact that they did the based on the true story stuff a lot in the 70s, and you had a lot of the warnings with like Psycho and I think even with The Exorcist, there was a lot of talk about people like being appalled and fainting and all that stuff during The Exorcist. And you talk to other people as well, and they'll be like, no, people watch The Exorcist because it was funny to watch a little girl curse, you know? So it just depends on who you ask. And some people's like, oh my God, it's so scary and so terrifying. No, it's funny because you're seeing a little girl curse. So who knows when people try to, do these marketing things, what's true and what's not.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, I personally, I would love to be scared by horror movies are my favorite genre, but there's very few things that actually can scare me anymore. Maybe I'm just too jaded from seeing so much carnage over the years. I don't know, but
No, I have a bad memory. I do know I brought up to you last week that the scariest thing I saw in a movie was Precinct 13 when the little girl got shot in the head with the ice cream cone.
Yeah.
Did I ask you this last week? Have you ever been scared in a movie?
Yes. In fact, there's two movies that scare me to this day. Stephen King's Salem's Lot and The Howling, the original The Howling. Something about the atmosphere of that movie in the woods and the werewolves out there. Those two movies to this day still get me. I saw them when I was very young, and they've held the test of time for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to get scared when you're a cynic, but yeah, if a movie does it, they're doing something right. So we obviously just mentioned the whole warning, don't watch this, has become a trope. There's a lot of other things that this movie started that also have become tropes as well. The mad scientist. And the thing I like about the way they handled this mad scientist is that after this movie, 90% of movies that had mad scientists was about don't play God, science versus like religion and things like that. This movie didn't harp on that. It wasn't like the whole movie was about that. And I think that's where a lot of the other movies that try to replicate this or had mad scientists in it kind of, lost me, is that it was just so much religion and science and, is wrong. But it's like, damn it, you wouldn't be watching this movie without science, it's like technology. All that stuff is the reason, like, we're not just like, crapping ourselves in caves and stuff, So, but yeah, this movie did start a lot of tropes, and I think it did it really well, a lot of the stuff that it did as well. So.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned scientists. Now that I think about it, scientists get a bad rap because whenever we see them on screen, they're doing things they shouldn't be doing.
Yes, like playing God.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Yeah, it's a very stylized film, very surreal. Not a lot of stuff in there is completely realistic from the look of it, aside from the little girl getting killed. And I wonder how they handled it in the original cut, because a big part of it is not just her being thrown in the water, but then that's the catalyst for them going after Frankenstein's monster.
Right.
So I'm not sure how they handled it if they left that out.
Unless they just had that, because there was this scene right after where the father was carrying the girl through the city, and maybe they just cut to that. Who knows? Yeah, I don't know.
And left the rest to our imagination.
Yeah.
Maybe that would work as well. I'm very surprised they didn't make him as sympathetic. Like I said, my memories of him being sympathetic, I think, mainly came from the sequels. But in the end, listen, I'm a black guy, so when I hear or see the crowd coming to like lynch and torch somebody, it's like I'm never for the crowd. But in this movie, I can't say I was completely against them. Like he killed two people at that point, including a little girl. He killed the doctor that was there, and then he killed the little girl, and he eventually almost killed Frankenstein. And they were like, hey, if you can take him alive, do that as well. So I can't necessarily say I was against the crowd with their torches and pitchforks.
I was going to say that is one of the most interesting lines of dialogue I heard. It was when they said, get him alive if you can.
Remember, get him alive if you can, but get him!
That's not something you would expect from an angry mob with pitchforks. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, like I said, that's why I brought it up as well. I guess it both of us it was memorable for, because again, you think of these movies, you think of the trope of grab your pitchforks and your torches. You think of all that stuff. Even you think of Frankenstein. You think this mob mentality. It's all wrong. You know, they're overreacting. I think they were kind of reasonable, you know. I thought it was interesting too. The happy ending. I guess I should have known because I saw the movie before, but I was surprised. I I didn't remember exactly how it ended, but it was kind of like a little bit more of a sappier ending than I initially remembered it being. The monsters, as far as we know, is dead, happily ever after with the couple. Um, you know, like a nice, neat ending, which I guess is fine. You know, wrapped everything up at the end. But I thought it was a little bit darker because you always think of this movie as a tragedy. I don't get necessarily what's tragic about it. Um, I think Frankenstein deserved to get killed. You know, um, eh, I don't know. I can't see this as a tragedy. I just think it's a typical monster movie. You know, so
Yeah. Well, again, I think that goes back to the era where there was happy endings on everything. You know, why not on a monster movie too? Who knows?
yeah. The last thing I'll mention before I let you give your final thoughts, well, two other things. One is that this was interesting with Karloff in that he was in his mid 40s at this point, had been acting for like 12 years. So it was interesting that someone this late in their career had a star-making turn, which is good, you know. Um, but the other thing was this movie. Now I know you mainly watch 80s movies. Not sure how many movies you've watched from this era. But in this
I've watched a
era,
ton. I've watched a ton of them,
okay,
including this year. I've watched a bunch.
okay, I'll try to remember that, and not underestimate your knowledge of this era. Then. But for me, like and you're married too, so maybe I'm not. You know, I'm not married, so I haven't been in a position where I've been forced to watch a lot of romantic comedies. So combining your knowledge of this era and combining your knowledge of whatever movies your wife has made you watch, um, how many of these movies, either romantic movies or movies, like I said, I think I mentioned earlier in this review, movies of this era had the romantic subplots in them? Um, were there cucks in the movies, cuckolds? Because there was a cuckold in this movie, Victor.
You know I'd go to the ends of the earth for you.
I shouldn't like that. I'm far too fond of you.
I wish you were.
Victor.
I'm sorry.
Good night, Victor, and thank you.
And when I saw him, I'm like, Jesus Christ, how many of these movies do I have to see where it's just this guy who's not in a relationship with the main female character, who's just there at her beck and call to do anything she wants, risk his life at a moment's notice, knowing that she's with someone else and acknowledges that he's in love with her and she could care less. I just feel like grow a spine, you know. It's like get some. There are other women that exist in the world, you know. But I just like it's such a trope of movies of this era because especially when you have the main protagonist being like someone like Frankenstein who is doing something that's taking him like to a darker side where like his girl is trying to pull him back to the other side and then the girl has this male support by her side. It's like is this am I overblowing it or is this a big part of these type of movies?
No, I don't think you're overblowing it. I think it's in a lot of these films from that era. You always have the macho man, of course. Although I think sometimes you see movies that I don't want to say it's a love triangle, but the woman is with somebody who is for some reason bad, and then there's the good guy who also likes her. And ultimately, the bad guy is going to get eliminated in some way, shape, or form, and the cuck, as you would say, can come to the rescue and be the hero and be the new man at the end of the movie. That I see too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which was surprising because even Frankenstein said, like, if anything happens to me, no matter what it is, I want you to be there for her, which is kind of setting up that you would think he'd die. But like you said, they could have been forced to have the happy ending because movies like this always had happy endings. But it kind of set it up that you would think that he was obviously going to die and the other guy would come in and be with the girl. But yeah, just like when I see these guys, I just like, I don't know if it's being a guy that I'm like, come on, dude, grow a spine. But it always bothers me when I see it in these films. I don't know why. So, Is it a part of romantic comedies as well, or romantic films? Do you see that a lot there as well? Or?
Well, I can tell you that I watch a lot of Hallmark movies these days. My wife enjoys those types of movies, so it's kind of a trade-off. I watch her crap, and she watches my crap. But yeah, those are pretty cookie-cutter stories. There's usually a guy who's not meant for the girl, and they split up, and then some other guy swoops right in. It seems to be very common, yes.
Mhm. Yeah, but I think it goes beyond the guy swooping in. It's that this guy is just like there all the time for her, you know, even while she's with the other guy. It's one thing if she breaks up with the other guy and a new guy comes in. It's like, no, this guy knows that she's with this guy, and he's still there, like waiting, like in the weeds, you know, just like I don't know. But yeah, any other final thoughts on the film?
No, I recommend it. It's a good movie. Yeah, again, watch all the sequels too.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, for a long time, I wasn't sure. It took down to like the late last night before we knew it was going to be this or Bride. But yeah, I'm happy with this. I think Bride is probably a better movie having watched this. But hopefully we'll watch Bride some more down the line. But yeah, definitely 2 thumbs up on this one.